Ambassador Katju, 20 years since Kargil, and we've talked about the military lessons that have been learned both for the Army and the Air Force, intelligence failures, warnings that could have come as early as 1998. It did come as a surprise, though, considering the diplomatic ladder that was being stepped up, so as to speak, the bus trip to Lahore, the Lahore Declaration.
Of course, it was a surprise. It was a military surprise. I think that is acknowledged by us. But I think the army performed exceedingly well after it absorbed that surprise. And at the end of the day, we achieved our military objectives. The military success that we achieved has in some ways obscured our diplomatic success of that period, led by the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, with his two pillars of support were External Affairs Minister Jaswant Singh, the then Principal Secretary and National Security Advisor Brajesh Misra, and someone who has always shunned the limelight, but who's been one of our best diplomats ever, the then Foreign Secretary Raghunath. I think we performed diplomatically in an exceptional way. We were able to achieve all our diplomatic objectives. What were these? Quite clearly, in hindsight, 20 years later, we can distill them. They were first of all to show that Pakistan was the aggressor, that it was not the Pakistan, as the Pakistanis said, the Mujahideen, but it were Pakistani regulars who had crossed the LOC. Two, we were able to show to the world that the Pakistanis were irresponsible, and that the army was an irresponsible army and the state was irresponsible. Why do I say that? Because the Kargil operation took place just a year after the nuclear tests. Nuclear powers have to behave with a certain moderation and balance. They can't jeopardize peace, as the Pakistanis clearly did. And so, diplomatically, we were able to show that conclusively. And third, and most importantly, we were able to show to the world and convince them that we will not rest till each Pakistani soldier had been pushed across the line of control.
When you talk about nuclear states and the responsibility they hold, 1998, just a year before when those tests were conducted, in a sense, Kargil and subsequently, as India successfully called Pakistan's nuclear bluff.
We were able to achieve that objective in Kargil.
Correct.
Subsequently, I find that when it came to terror, held our hand. The Pakistanis have this view of the nuclear overhang. So the Pakistanis put forward the argument that any use of regular forces by India in response to a terrorist attack would endanger peace, because it could be an escalation leading to an intensified armed conflict, which had, and this is how they projected it, and they still do, has the danger of leading to the possible use of nuclear weapons. Now, all this is hogwash. In 2008, again, we held our hand and we chose the diplomatic way of handling the Mumbai 2611 aftermath. Mr. Modi's actions, first in the surgical strike, which the Pakistanis denied, that was post-Uri, and now Balakot. What has it demonstrated? It has demonstrated that following the doctrine of preemption, we've put the world on notice. by stating that escalation begins with the preparations for a terrorist strike. And therefore, the onus of preventing escalation is squarely with Pakistan. This is quite different from escalation beginning with a response to a terrorist strike. I do believe that this is something that our diplomacy needs to project more actively. We are not doing that. We need to, and our academia, our media, needs to project this, that India is not willing to accept terrorist attacks emanating from Pakistan anymore, because if we start doing this, I do believe that pressure would mount on Pakistan and it would be put to them by the international community, the major players, including China, that they've played this game long enough and that it must end.
Talking about Kargil and how we projected diplomatically and how the world saw how we were acting, the LOC wasn't crossed that time. Subsequently, both in the surgical strike and in Balakot, it has. We've gone into Pakistan. That change, is that adding to calling Pakistan's bluff?
I think in 1999, we had to, and this is my personal view, we had to demonstrate that we are responsible, that we can absorb losses and yet act in a calibrated way without endangering peace. That was 1 year after the nuclear tests. 20 years later, we've established this. Today, the situation is different. We are accepted as a major power. Let me just add this. If you see the entire history of the Cold War, never did the two principal adversaries, the US and the Soviet Union, ever play games on each other's territory. Here, the Pakistanis have used nuclear weapons as a shield to promote terror. And by not nipping it in the bud, we allowed this view of a nuclear overhang to continue. I do think that we have started ending it. It will not be easy. They well may try more games. And purists may say that, look, we don't know how all this will pan out. I, on the other hand, believe firmly that if we say that we will not allow terrorism anymore, that if there are preparations, we reserve the right to act in self-defense and strike, the international community will put immense pressure on the Pakistanis to stop. And I am seeing some green shoots of maybe some new thinking in Pakistan. It's still very early. But they perhaps are realizing that this game is dangerous.
Thanks, sir. Thanks.
Pleasure.